presentation. My name is Kyle Sellerud, and I'm here with Mike Rhodes, who has joined me from across the globe. So for him, it's actually Thursday morning. For me, it's Wednesday evening. And if everyone else, if you're here, if you can kind of just tell us where you are in the world, I think that would be good to know. And let me know that you can see the slide on the screen. It should say Google's AI for AdWords. So we have Todd from Brooklyn, Zeke from Minnesota, Gabriella from Poland, Justin from Pittsburgh. All right, tons of people here. Tyler, Hema, Chris. Too many to keep up with, but we are representing here from all over the place. So that's awesome. Tony from the UK. It must be pretty late for you, Tony. All right, so great. And guys, if you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and let me know. So Mike isn't going to be able to see your questions while he's presenting, but if there's something that I think should be brought up, I'll go ahead and just kind of interrupt him. And if I don't get to anything, if we don't get to anything during the presentation, we will have some time afterwards as well. So let me just introduce Mike quickly. You should know him. If not, you will know him by the end of this hour, because I believe your minds are going to be blown by what he's about to share. So Mike has been doing this AdWords thing for a long time, over 14 years. He's the co-author of The Ultimate Guide to Google AdWords, which I think most of you probably associate that book more with Perry Marshall, but Mike is really the AdWords genius behind that book. He has been researching AI ever since Google has been working on it, and he's really deep into it. So a few months ago, someone was asking for book recommendations, and I saw one of Mike's responses, and he listed like 10 different books. And I went and checked them out, and they were all about artificial intelligence. So he's really been researching this subject a lot lately, and I'm really looking forward to what he's going to be presenting here. And I'm sure you guys are too. So let me stop jabbering away here, and I will hand it over to Mike. So Mike, how are you doing?
I'm great, Carl. Thank you for inviting me on. It's good to be here.
Awesome.
So we'll start with a story, because I like to start with stories. It's the story of a little business that wasn't doing very much, it appeared. 2014, our story starts. This company was founded 4 years earlier, and in early 2014, they had nothing. They had no clients and no revenue. And then Google came knocking on the door and offered to buy them for about $460 million. So funnily enough, they said yes. You may be wondering why on earth Google wanted to pay close to $500 million for a company with no revenue and no clients. What they had amassed by this point was a collection of about 110 of some of the smartest AI minds on the planet. The company was called DeepMind, and it's now a pretty integral part of Google. What they were doing at the time, when Google came knocking on the door, was they were teaching their, we'll just call it the machine. You know, we'll talk about AI and machine learning and some of the differences a little later, but not going into to too much detail. But we'll just say the machine, because it keeps things easy. They were teaching their machine to play Atari games, because they had decided that Atari games had this sort of right level of difficulty between being hard enough that it was a hard enough and interesting enough problem for them to do, but easy enough that they thought they might actually be able to teach it. And they taught the machine to play these games literally just by looking at the pixels on the screen. Now, computers' history of playing games goes way back. In the 50s, they built a computer about the size of a tennis court. It was an enormous thing, and it could play tic-tac-toe. This was revolutionary at the time, a computer that could actually beat a human at tic-tac-toe by following, obviously, a bunch of rules. In the 90s, they taught a computer to beat the Grandmaster Kasparov at chess for the first time. late 90s, that was 97. And the way a computer can beat a human at chess is that at any point in the game, it can look at what all of the next possible moves are, what all of the next possible moves by your opponent could be, what all of your next possible moves after that could be, and essentially play that out to the end of the game. So it's called brute force. You can beat the human by brute force. At every point in the game, you can work out all of the remaining possible moves, and therefore which one is the best one to take. Then we get to the ancient Chinese strategy game of Go. This is about 3,000 years old. And it's considered the hardest game for humans to master. It's incredibly simple in its rule set, very, very few rules, but that gives way to an incredibly complicated game with, for all intents and purposes, a near infinite number of moves. So that there are more potential board positions in this game than there are atoms in the universe. So you can't brute force it. You can't do what they did with chess. You can't work out all of the possible moves. And in chess, you've even got a scoring system. You know, your queen's worth 9 points, your bishop's worth 5 points, and so on. And you can approximate who is in the lead at any one time. You can't really even do that with Go. You can count the squares on the board, but it can flip from turn to turn. Whoever's in ahead at this point, I should put ahead into quotation marks, one stone can completely flip that, and then the other person is seemingly ahead. So it's an incredibly complicated game, but you can't brute force it. So what human players do with this game is they use their intuition. If you ask a professional Go player why did they make a particular move, they'll say it just felt right. And so that's why, if we go back, say, 10 years, the best AI minds at the time, apart from Demis and his guys over at DeepMind, everybody believed that this was decades away of being able to teach a computer how to play this game, because it relied on intuition, not just a whole bunch of rules. And yet, 2 years after Google bought DeepMind, and probably threw a few resources at it, they beat the best in the world. The guy on the right here, Lee Sedol, from South Korea, they beat him 4-1. Now, he went into that game saying, I will never be beaten by a cold computer. At the end of game 2, he said afterwards, he never felt in control once. He was absolutely shocked. In the presser afterwards, he was just sitting there in shock that this game had played so beautifully, and had basically been beating him from the start. He did manage to win one game in that series. But then the next year, which is last year, 2017, AlphaGo, which is what DeepMind, Go program, if you like, think of it as a program running on this fancy computer. It beat another best in the world guy, who's 19, for goodness sake, the Grandmaster, beat him 3-0. And Google at that point realized that what they built is never going to get beat by a human again. But this is where it gets really interesting. Late last year, they built a machine they called AlphaGo Zero. Now, what this chart is, what the blue line shows going up here, that's essentially how good it is at playing Go. We don't need to worry about what an ELO rating is. All you need to worry about is the time across the bottom here in days. In 3 hours, this thing learned to play like a regular human. In 20 hours, it was as good as a professional player, and it took just 3 days to get to that green line, the green dotted line, which is as good as AlphaGo was when it beat Lee Sedol back in 2016. Obviously, they improved things a bit between 2016 and 2017, so that's what the blue dotted line is at the top. So this was the god of Go, and it took 21 days to get as good as that machine. After 40 days, it beat that old machine 100 games to 0. But here's the kicker. They didn't teach AlphaGo Zero anything about how to play the game. All they did was taught it a couple of basic rules. These are black stones, these are white stones, this is the board. These are the very few rules that you need to know. Off you go. They didn't feed it in with the first computer, what they did is they took all of the results of all of the games from all the professional games in the world that they could find, fed them all into the computer, and had the computer replay those games. And it sort of, whizzed through that. Didn't take very long, and said, I need more data. So they built another machine and basically had the two play each other 30 million times. That's how they got good enough to beat Lisa Dahl. With this one, they didn't do that. They didn't feed in any data from previous games. They just said, off you go, play. And obviously it was pretty terrible for the first couple of minutes. Within 3 hours, it's as good as a human. 20 hours to be as good as a professional human player. And this is a game that generally takes years and years, if not decades, to master. And now, all the way down the end here, after just 40 days, it's beating it 100 games to 0. Why am I telling you all of this? What on earth has this got to do with Google? Well, other than the fact that Google now owns DeepMind, which is the obvious link, I'll come back to that in a little bit and explain why this is so important when we're talking about AdWords. So my goal for you listening today is to dig into a little bit what this AI can do and how much you might want to be trusting it, or how much you use it to get results for your own account. Or I'm going to assume that most of us on the call are doing this for clients, but this applies equally to your own account as well. Now, to save you taking a million notes, and I'm waiting for us to post the replay of this, if you just write down that URL, you grab a copy of the slides for yourself from there, so you can go through these again at your leisure afterwards. I'll give you a second just to grab that URL. Maybe we can share that again in the Q&A if it comes up. So what we're really trying to figure out is where on this continuum we want to be. If 0% down here is head in the sand, not using any of Google's AI at all, running AdWords completely manually, and over on the right, Google fanboy, only using Google AI, not using any human intervention at all. Spoiler alert, it's probably neither of those extremes. It's probably somewhere in between. What we want to try and figure out today is exactly where you want to sit on that line. And that's going to depend a little bit on where you are now. So I'm going to give you a framework that we can use to try and figure out where you are now, and therefore what you might want to think about doing next. I talk to a lot of agencies, I consult to agencies, teach a lot of agencies how to grow, both in terms of how to do AdWords, but also how to grow their agency. And this is a huge, huge thing. And it should be a big question that you obsess over at this point. How are we all adding value 2-3 years into the future as this AI gets better and better? We're at the point where I don't believe that you can sensibly ignore it anymore. Carl gave me a lovely introduction before. Thank you for the kind words. I did co-write the book with Perry. We have an agency that does this for people and audits other agencies' work if you ever want a second pair of eyes over an account or you're stuck with something. And then Agency Savvy, which maybe we'll talk a little bit about later, where I teach hundreds of agency owners how to do AdWords and how to grow the business. So we'll start with the AI. Sundar is the boss of Google, and he said at the summit last May that Google have moved from being a mobile-first company to an AI-first company. He said we're moving to an AI-first world, and Google arguably has always been an AI-first company. The AI is in basically everything. You're using it every day when you use Google products, and obviously things like Amazon and Siri as well, but it's in virtually all of their products, starting with Google Translate, which is streets ahead. If you ever use Google Translate, just even 2-3 years ago, you'll remember how laughable it was. You could cut and paste an English sentence, turn it into Italian, and then cut and paste that answer back into English, and it didn't even resemble the original sentence. Now it's near perfect.
Yeah, that was an entire game, was having
Yes.
Google translate things back and forth.
And seeing how quickly it went off the rails, but and now it's near perfect, and now it can do it in real time. We were actually, my wife's Italian, and her cousins, she's got lots and lots of cousins over in Italy, and the kids were using my phone, talking into it. It would then speak Italian to their little cousins. They'd speak back into it. It would understand them, even though they're 5-6 years old, and then turn that back into English. So they were able to have a conversation as 5-year-olds with an iPhone in between them. It was amazing just the speed of that. And now you can even hold it up to signs, and it will translate the sign, turn it into your language, basically remove the middle part of the sign, put the right word. So you're holding it up to I don't know, a menu in French or something, and it'll translate that in real time on the phone, not in airplane mode, not going up to the cloud. Translate all of that, turn it into your language, and show you the picture of it in your language. It's mind blowing how fast that has improved. The thing for me, this is my little 3-year-old. The thing for me was when I brought home this Google Home from a trip to the States about 15 months ago. So her big sister starts talking to it and playing music on it. Her big sister would have been 5 at the time. Frankie was 2.5 at the time. So she watches this for a few days and then walks up to it and Google, play Frozen. And it did. It understood her, and it played the music that she wanted to play. At 2.5, the AI was able to understand her dodgy accents and her shouting at this thing. And that was when I realized, oh my God, this is very real. And the game has changed.
So is Google going to help us translate what our toddlers are saying half the time?
Mate, I think that there are people working on what babies are saying. There was actually an AI, this is a couple of months ago I saw this story, but they've an AI listening to dolphin conversations and trying to translate dolphin clicks into English. And they actually think they're making progress, bizarrely. We're going to see a lot of stories like that. What is AI? This is a question I always get asked. It's just an intelligent machine. Think of it just as that, as an intelligent machine. But within that, there are all of these little subsections. And the one that we're most interested in is the one at the top there, machine learning. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the various little corners of the world into machine learning, but the one that DeepMind was focused on is the one right at the top there, which is deep learning and using neural networks. And we won't go near the math or the geeky stuff of that. We just need to know enough to be able to use it sensibly. What is important to understand is just to give some context around this of where we are right now, but also where this is going and how fast it's going, is to understand why this is such a big topic right now, why it wasn't, say, even 5 years, 10 years ago. 3 main things that have changed. The first is just this explosion in data, because we're all carrying around these computers in our pockets and sharing everything with the world. So it's the sort of the culmination of smartphones happening, Facebook, Twitter, all of that happening around the same time. Just the amount, the volume of data that is being captured, which gives the machine lots of learning and lots of teaching data. The power of the machines. So some bright spark worked out a few years ago that if you use the graphics cards in good old computers, they were actually much better at doing the particular calculations that the AI needs. Google went ahead and built their own variation on that. So in a computer, you got a CPU, in a graphics card, you got a GPU, and Google went and built this thing called a TensorFlow unit, or a TPU. This is one of Google's TPU machines, and it can do calculations today in a day that even in the 90s, back when Kasparov was getting his ass kicked playing chess, that computer back then would have taken 250,000 years to do the calculation that this thing can now do in a day. So that's why this has just exploded all of a sudden. We've got loads of data to teach it, but just the sheer speed of these things to be able to go round and round and round and round and improve the model and improve the algorithm. And that's the third part to this. The combination of those two gives the geeks these far better algorithms. The machine, which we're just going to call it today because AI and ML just sounds too geeky, but the machine has just got better and better and better on this exponential curve. So it's getting better by the day, by the minute, arguably. So let's dig into the data first. We all know that Google has got more data than the god of your choice, but it hasn't always been, shall we say, particularly keen on monetizing all of that. And I would argue big disclaimer needed here. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. This is just my humble opinion. Nobody can sue me, hopefully. But I think that, and I'm sure that your listeners have experienced this, Google will do a lot of stuff where, I mean, just the other day, right, they've banned crypto ads. Why? Because they're worried that sooner or later somebody will take part in an ICO and say, I took part in that because I saw one of your ads. I trust you, Google, and so therefore I trusted this ad and I put my life savings in and I lost it all, and I'm going to sue you to get my life savings back. Google don't want that to happen. They also don't want someone suing them because of embarrassment caused by somebody else on a shared computer seeing their remarketing ad. That's why you can't do remarketing in most medical situations, or really anything of a sensitive nature. Debt, you can't do remarketing in the debt market. I think that a huge part of that is because Google's lawyers are saying, yep, well, that's too risky, not having that. You know, if you're an old school AdWords guy like me, you remember 2010, I think it was 2009 maybe, where they just shut down 30,000 accounts overnight. Anything remotely to do with affiliate stuff, bridge pages, all of that just went. And there were a few good actors mixed up in that, but they don't care. They just say, no, we don't need that money. We don't need that revenue. We're just not going to have any ads from that part of the world. But that world is changing. There's these two little companies now. This is a, as Carl said at the beginning, an encore presentation of what I talked about in San Diego about a month ago, before the Cambridge Analytica thing all happened and before Facebook's stock dived about 30%. But there are these two companies. Actually, Amazon had a bit of a tumble last night as well. But there are these two big companies snapping at Google's heels, making big dents in their market. That, I think, changes the game a little bit for them. They have all of these other companies that they would like to keep monetizing, and most of the ones on the top row there are burning through money at a fair rate. They would like to keep earning money to pay for all of that. And obviously they want to maintain their number one position as the top search game in town. That is particularly lucrative to them, obviously, and they don't want that to go away. So I think we're going to see them use this data on us more and more and more. And just to sort of underscore how smart and strategic these boys are, think about what they've done here. They bought this little company called Urchin over a decade ago, turned it into Google Analytics, gave it away for free. It was a paid product up until then, and that is now on virtually every website that matters in the world. Android, which they actually bought 2 years before the first iPhone was created. And of course, now that's the world's most used smartphone, and they get all of the data from that. YouTube, which they bought for a whopping 1.6 billion back in 2006, and we all thought they were crazy. Last year, they made 2.89 billion just in 1 year from YouTube. And of course, they created Chrome, which is the world's most used browser. So they're reasonably smart. They have a lot of data, and they're getting more and more and more. But we've got this next problem then of complexity. And again, this little company down the road from them is much simpler for whether it, particularly, you know, that small business to set up by themselves, or that digital agency to set up and start running. That is a problem. So a lot of budget has flown over to this company because it's easier. It's easier to get started. It's easier to get that first win. AdWords has become so complicated over the years. I used to use a couple of slides at the start of some presentations where I'd show a little picture of a light aeroplane and then a picture of a 747 cockpit. You know, AdWords used to be like that light aeroplane. It's basically like driving a car, but it goes up and down. It used to be pretty easy. There weren't many bells and whistles. Now, as we all know, there's 100 bells and whistles and different settings that you can use to improve your results. And that's just too overwhelming for a lot of people, which is a problem for Google. So what have they done? They've tried to simplify that. They've come out with products like DSA and said, if you're about to miss somebody, again, it looks like they're searching for what you're talking about on your website, but hey, that's not a keyword in your account. We're going to show an ad to that person. We're going to jump in front of them and we'll write the ad and we'll decide how much to pay for that, because that isn't actually a keyword in your account. And that can work really well. This is some results from an account that the team are working on. And you can see over on the left, the term that somebody was searching for, Boost Juice franchise, which at the time wasn't a keyword in this particular account. You can see most of the ad that Google then decided to show, and it's getting a 28% click-through rate. Well, that's not too shabby, and what, $2.36 a lead in a market where this client's more than happy to pay $10-20 for a lead. You know, selling a franchise, if you can get those leads for $20, you're profitable. Getting them for $2 is insane. But a lot of the time, this campaign type really doesn't work very well. You know, we audit a lot of accounts, and we've seen probably, I'd say the most, I don't have hard numbers on this, but I'd say overall, on average, most DSA campaigns that we see are probably wasting 80% of their budget. And quite often they can be the highest spend campaign in an account. So unless you know what you're doing, they can be a bit dangerous. AdWords Express was an absolute dog when it came out. I don't think anybody at Google would argue with that. It has improved, but it hasn't had the traction that I think they wanted to see. If you're a small business and you're only spending a couple of $100 a month, it might be an option to you. At least you can do conversion tracking now, which you couldn't when it first came out, or split testing. But it doesn't have the power of AdWords, and certainly for any agency listening, I couldn't possibly recommend it. And then we've got this nice new interface that we're all battling with at the moment and having to relearn our muscle memory of where everything is. And the biggest thing that I see with this, and they do have plans to add more cards to the overview screen and more AI, more machine learning powering this, but the trend here is pretty clear to me, that they are simplifying more and more the AdWords interface and what we get to be able to do in there. And I don't like that, because I'm a control freak. I know what I'm doing in there, and I want to be able to control that. And I think this trend is only going to continue over the next 2, 3, 4 years, where Google will automate more and more stuff around here using this AI and machine learning that we're talking about, and removing that control away from us. And if you want that level of control, well, that's what DoubleClick will be for. So before we talk about some of the features that we might choose to use or not that are based on this AI, let's just take a step back and try and figure out what we're actually solving for here. What are we trying to do for our clients? What is advertising? Someone much smarter than me said that it's showing the right message to the right person at the right time. I would add to that, doing so profitably, because I'm a direct response guy, not a brand guy. So let's turn that into a little framework then that we can use to work through and understand how Google is attacking each of these areas. Showing the right message. Well, message is the ad copy itself, the landing page, to the right people. That's our targeting, using keywords and the new audience targeting. That's a growing part of the Google machine, and doing so profitably by looking at the bidding and the budgets. And I'd argue that the machines are coming up from the bottom, and they're going to knock over these 3 layers. So let's start with the bidding and budget side. And this ties us back to DeepMind. So this machine that beat the old machine 100 to 1 in just 40 days without being taught, that's the machine that controls Google's smart bidding, essentially. That's the simplified version of it. So if you've been putting your head in the sand, and if your experience has been much like ours, where you've tried some of Google's so-called smart bidding in the past, you've tried the bid portfolio strategies, and your results have typically been worse, you're not alone. But I think we're at a tipping point now where that is started to change just in the last 6 months. If we went back a year ago, I would say ballpark on average, as we were testing Google smart bidding versus our own methods, we'd probably win 80% of the time. 6 months ago, probably more like 50-50. And now, if you give it enough time, if you give it a couple of weeks, and if you've got enough volume, then now it's probably more like 20% of the time that we win and 80% of the time that the machine wins. I think we've hit that tipping point where very soon the machine will be impossible to beat, and it's just not worth trying to bang your head against that wall anymore. Sure, there will be some cases where you do outperform the machine, and it's really easy at that point to go, ha, see, told you, I'm better than all of that. It's not any good. The machine it's still a toddler, and I can beat it. And that's lovely, but remember, this thing is improving by the second on that exponential curve. We're linear beings, and we tend to improve a little bit slower than that. So you probably want to take a look at it. There are 7 models that Google allow you to use. And like we said, it isn't perfect yet, but it is getting better quickly. And we'll come back to those models in a bit and look at the 2 that I would recommend that you use. And just to illustrate how much this plays in, I'm just going to walk you through a little example just to point out just some of the data that Google has but can't or won't share with us. So let's do a little A/B test here. We've got Alice and Belinda, and they're both on Google typing in buy Miele washing machine. And your job as you look at this is to work out how much, maybe not to the cent, but how much relatively you might want to bid on this keyword as you get a bit more information. So let's imagine that you know that Alice is on a desktop, Belinda's on a phone. If, like many of us control freaks doing AdWords, you might have those 2 things in 2 separate campaigns, then you're probably bidding a bit more for Alice than Belinda at this point, because you know on average that visits from desktop convert 3 times better than mobile for this particular site. You've got that data in GA, in AdWords, and so you bid accordingly. And top right up here, for the sake of clarity here and just making this easy, we're going to assume that these 2 are in the same city. They're searching at the same time of the week. They're roughly the same age bracket. They're the same income bracket. So we're not going to even worry about moving all of those levers around. We're just going to keep things simple. Now, we also know that both of these guys were on our site recently, and so they're both on remarketing lists. And if we're smart, hopefully we've got some RLSA running over the top of our search campaigns, and we're bidding based on that. We may even, if we're really good, know that the average value of the products that they looked at on our website is different. We might have them in different buckets based on that, and we might be looking at, say, time on site or page depth and bidding based on that as well. So now we're maybe starting to bid Belinda up a little bit more, because she seems like a bit more of a valuable customer, but still she's on a mobile, so bid down again over there. But we're trying to do this manually at this point. Now, Google knows that in between those visits, they both spent 20 minutes on YouTube. Prior to getting to your site, Google also knows that Belinda did some additional searches. It knows what those search terms are, but you don't know that because your ad didn't happen to show for those searches, so you don't even have any impression data, certainly not any click data. Google also knows that prior to that, Belinda was on the Miele site and spent 20 minutes over there. It also knows what Belinda was searching for on YouTube, and it knows that Alice was watching Peppa Pig videos. It also knows what operating system these people are using, and the fact that Belinda has an iPhone 10 and is smart enough to install Chrome on it might change your perception, but you don't get to know that. Only Google does. And so Google is taking all of this, and not even just these signals, but it's the combination of all of these signals that it's using. It knows that people that have just done this and this and this at this time are more likely to do that. So even if Google could give us the data, I mean, just think for a second about what that UI might look like. It's never going to be able to. It couldn't even really make all of that data available through the API. And if it did, we'd all have to go and build our own AI models just to deal with the wave of data that would hit us. And Google knows that we wouldn't do that as well as they would. So they're just saying, stuff it. You're just going to have to trust in our models and let us do all of that with our AI, because we've got the best guys on the planet working on this, and it's in our interests to make sure that we do that well. You're just going to have to trust us. Control freaks, sorry. I don't like it either, but the machine is pretty bloody smart at this point. However, if you don't want to just blindly believe me and all of the tests that the team here have done over the past few years, as Google have been rolling this out and improving it bit by bit, and we've been testing it for a long time. If you don't want to believe that, I would suggest that you test it for yourself. And so let's dig into the more tactical part now, and stop going so high level and talk about drafts and experiments in a bit more detail. And there are two models. We mentioned the 7 before, but there are two main ones that I would suggest that you test. If you're running a lead gen site, either for yourself or for your clients, then I'd suggest you look at target CPA. If you're running an e-com site, then look at target ROAS, return on ad spend. As a minimum, as a rough minimum, you want to make sure before you let the machine take over that you're running at around about 50 leads a month, at a campaign level, ideally, not just across the whole account, but ideally that's at a campaign level. And for e-com, around about 100 sales per month is a good point to, once you've got to there, then test. The question that always comes up is, what if I don't have that level of that volume of conversion data? Well, you're making decisions based on really, really sparse data too at this point. And many of the assumptions that we as humans will use in that case are going to be flawed, right? So I would still recommend that you test the machine. You just might want to be a bit more cautious. You might want to watch it a bit more closely because the machine is going to have a lot of variance with so little data. But again, give it enough time, it'll probably get to your level. And once it gets there, it'll probably beat you. It's just whether or not you can stand that CPA bouncing around all over the place. And the machine will do some pretty dumb things. It is a toddler at this point. It does need to be supervised.
So quick question.
Yeah.
Why does it take the machine so long? So assuming you've been running a campaign for 6 months and you're getting 50 leads a month, wouldn't they already have all this data on what's bringing you those leads? Or is there a reason that it has to learn how to do it itself?
Yeah, and it will absolutely use that past data, but then it's going to start modeling and it's going to test those model assumptions sort of in real time from the point where you turn that on. And they have this nice chart that they share. I haven't found it in the help center, but it's probably there somewhere. But they've shared it at a couple of events I've been to recently, which is sort of next to this number. So at the top of the chart, you've got a number like 50 odd leads per month. The variance in CPA is going to be high and the learning time is going to be relatively long. Once you get to the other end of the chart, which is 500 leads, then the variance in CPA is going to be very low and the learning time is going to be much shorter. They don't put hard definitive amounts on those times. Mm-hmm. Short is probably a week to 2. Long is probably sort of 4 to 8 weeks territory. But obviously, if you've only got 5 conversions a month, it could well take longer than that.
Okay, but so it's more about once you give the machine the green light, they're going to start running tests and assumptions that you've never been able to do before yourself.
Because all of those, it's the combination of all of those factors that now come into play. And yes, obviously they keep data on all of that, but they're not going to go back and look at every single click. And I assume not. I don't know this for sure, but I assume they're not going to go back at every single click and try and find, all of the data points that were used at that point. Google used something like 70 million data points every single search. So every time you do a search on Google, they consider 70 million data points in 0.1 seconds to show that page of results to you. So I assume that they don't try and go back and look at, all 1 million impressions that you've had over those past 6 months, all 70 million data points for each, and try and sort of build their model from that. They certainly are going to build an initial model, but then they're going to tune that model over time for you, for your site, for your conversion rate, for your ads. And your ads and keywords and bids have probably changed over those 6 months too, hopefully. So that it really starts working hard once you, as you say, give it the green light.
Yeah, fascinating.
So test it though. If you don't want to believe me, test it. So in your account, and I'm guessing this audience is probably more aware of this than many people that I talk to about this stuff. But in the new interface, drafts and experiments, to run an experiment, you first have to create a draft. You can't just go into experiments first because it's built by geeks, so it's not intuitive. So you build a draft campaign first. Pro tip here is to name your draft campaigns something different to your main campaign. So our notation is we always put draft : in front of the original brand name and then use that original campaign name. But with draft in the front. Save that. Now go into that draft campaign and change something. So in this case, we're going to go to our campaign settings and change out from manual CPC to use one of the other models. So maybe target CPA. And then when we apply that, we get to choose whether we want to just apply those changes to the original campaign. Well, that's going to be basically like using something like adwords editor. I went in, I made a whole bunch of changes, and now I'm posting those changes to the campaign. We don't want to do that. We want to run an experiment. So we'll choose that option. And we have to name the experiment as well. So again, we name this different from the other two. So we usually use EXP : in front of these. I tend to favor a shorter campaign name so I can see everything over on the left hand side, but then we know that anything with EXP in the front is an experiment campaign. It'll automatically stop after 30 days unless you tell that to change. And the most important thing here is the split. So how much traffic do you want going into the experiment? If you're aggressive, you might go 50-50 here. If you're a bit more conservative, you might start with 20% to the experiment, 80% going through to the regular campaign. Save all of that, and then you'll find your experiment campaign underneath that campaign experiments tab, if you want to dive back into there. And let it run. And if you can, let it run for the full 4 weeks. I totally understand the pain of an experiment that goes wrong and your CPA doubles. We won't have that conversation today because we could probably spend half an hour on that, but how to set and manage client expectations with that sort of stuff, that's a whole different conversation. But keep a close eye on it, and obviously if results are really, really terrible, just end the experiment. But like I said, more and more we're finding that the experiments are working pretty well, especially if you can give it a week or two to bed in. It will probably match your CPA pretty quickly and then start beating it. And the volume as well tends to grow. Once it's got its head around it, then that volume can grow quite quickly. We had a Gmail campaign fairly recently that we were struggling to get working. I think the target CPA, these numbers are vague because I do it off the top of my head, but target CPA was around about 9 or 10, and this thing was running at about $20, and the volume was about 6 leads a week, which wasn't touching the sides on this account. We switched it over to target CPA, and within 2 weeks it was getting 100 leads a week for about $7. So it was a huge, huge turnaround. Now that's probably the best case example that we've seen, but the machine's pretty good. Don't use maximize clicks though. This was an account that the guys audited just the other day. $367 a click probably shouldn't exist in any market, but certainly not in this market, which should have been around about $10 to maybe $20 on the high side. These guys became clients and we were able to get them a refund on that. But yeah, maximize clicks is horrible. Google just going after cheap, crappy traffic just to spend your budget. Don't use that one. Other use cases of drafts and experiments, great for testing URLs, particularly if those URLs are on a different domain. So you can split your campaign, and in your experiment, you can have new ads with that new domain running, do a 50-50 test and find out very easily. The data is much easier to see than, say, using VWO or Optimizely or something like that. Use it to test new campaign settings. Or we've all had this one, right, where you take over that campaign that looks like it shouldn't be working, or it hasn't been touched in a year and you're afraid to touch it. It's full of broad match. It's got ads that haven't been changed in forever. Instead of just saying, well, that's the wrong way to do it, I'm going to rebuild it the proper way, and rolling out the new way and then having a disaster on your hands. Instead of that, you can build your new structure and run it against that existing structure, and maybe start at 10% or 20% going through the experiment and ramp that up over time when you've proven that your new structure does in fact beat the old one. Now, this isn't ready yet. This isn't available for shopping campaigns at this point, but I hope to see it happen at some stage. There is no timeline. I don't have any secret information on that, but I reckon they'll roll this out for shopping at one point. So if you are doing shopping ads, if you've got an e-com site, use the experiments on your search campaigns, get good at using them, understand how to use them, because that will be a real competitive advantage when this rolls out for shopping. So that's the bidding and budgets part of our framework. So I'm going to move the little green marker across the top here about a third of the way up and suggest that we definitely should be using the AI for this part of the account. Now let's move on and look at what else we might use it for. And I'm not saying use it across the board without supervising it, without looking at it, but you definitely want to be testing it and starting to roll that out across more and more campaigns. So let's move on to targeting. So just, when I showed this example before, you may be thinking, well, given the complexity of this, given all the audience data, the data that Google has about the people searching, why do we even need to bother with keywords anymore? You may be wondering, are keywords dead? Definitely not. I would say keep using them for as long as we can and as long as they are profitable. You're definitely not going away this month and almost certainly not this year. But I do want to put some perspective and some context around that. So I'll nick one of Winston Churchill's lines and let's take a look back at what Google have done elsewhere so that we can understand what they might do next. So if we go back 3 years, they launched universal app campaigns, which at the time were an optional way to run your app ads. And obviously now that's the only way that you can run app ads. No targeting options. Give me a target CPA, leave me alone, and off we go. Around about this time last year, they launched smart display campaigns. Has it only been a year, I hear you ask? Yep, it's only been a year. And smart display ads. Now, I love smart display ads, but they're not available on other GDN campaigns yet. That's a great use case for the machine learning. And I've been told by some of the guys on the GDN team that they are working on bringing smart display ads to other GDN campaigns, but that's not an option right now. I'm not a fan of smart display campaigns, in case you're wondering. I've seen them work. I've seen them really not work. And then even the ones that were working, I've only really seen them work well on pretty decent spends, 6-figure a month type spends or 7. And even then, some of those have fallen off a bit of a cliff and they were working well for 2-3 months and then all of a sudden they're not. So I just don't think that the machine is quite there yet when it comes to this stuff. Hopefully we'll see something, well, I suspect we will see something similar come to the shopping side of things as well. So all this automated campaign stuff, it's nothing's been announced yet to my knowledge, but that could well happen at some point in the future. So again, let's get very tactical, very practical with this so you've got some takeaways. So I just want to talk about some of the more recent changes, some of this powered by AI and what you might want to look at and what you might not want to look at. RLSA, remarketing lists for search ads, also applies to shopping. The naming convention of this has changed. So target and bid became targeting. Bid only has become observation. You want to be thinking about adding various audiences to your search and shopping campaigns. Just having them there as an observation and just collecting the data. So layer them across your top of your campaigns, whether that's a remarketing list or a similar list or a customer match list, one of your YouTube lists. Even if you just have a 5% bid mod, 10% bid mod, or even a 0% bid mod, you don't have to change the bid in order to observe how that audience behaves and collect some data. And that's what it looks like once that's all set up. In here, you can see that we've got this bid adjustment here. This is an e-com site, and we're saying, Google, we've got a group of people here that have added product to the cart. If you see that person again while they're searching, you know they're on this list up the bid by 50%, because we know that these people convert all the way down on the right hand side there. We know these people convert around about 50% better than the average bear. So we're willing to spend more money on them if you see those people again. Now, obviously, it's only a fraction of the traffic, but we're happy to spend more money on those people. Well worth trying. A relative of that, if you like, is DFSA, which is the demographic bidding, again on search and shopping. And so bidding differently based on age, gender, household income. There may be more of those to come. Household income's moved in here now. It used to be in your location settings. So it's moved across into this demographics section in the new interface. Again, you want to be thinking about adding some bid adjustments there based on your results. You know, there are no perfect numbers that you magically pick. Based on your conversion rate, your CPAs, you may want to think about adding those. The display network, I could happily talk about for an hour, but we haven't got time. But if you go to thedisplaygrid.com, this is a tool that I put together for my talk at TCS last year. And it was so nice actually meeting heaps of people in San Diego last month coming up and saying, yeah, thank you for this tool. I've won clients through it. I was scared of GDN before. I only did Facebook, but now I feel like I understand it. We're running campaigns for clients. We're getting great results. Or we were sort of doing a little bit of GDN before, but now we've tested 20 different campaigns and really scaled things up. That was really lovely to hear. So if you go to that page, that'll redirect you to this Google sheet. It's not on our site at this point. It's freely available. I won't even cookie you and remarket to you because it's a Google site. But if you look down the bottom left, just underneath the bottom of this grid, you'll find a couple of videos on there. One's a little short one, 13 minutes, and one's about an hour long. So you can pick and choose if you want the short version or the long version, and that they explain how to use the grid. No idea how much longer those will be up there, freely available. We're talking about potentially either hiding that just for members or probably putting some sort of email gate in front of that, because it's turning out to be a very, very popular tool that we should probably be using a bit more. On the remarketing side, wrote this article together with Trevor in our office a couple of years ago now. That's really still most of our best thinking around remarketing. So if you just search for remarketing grid Mike Rhodes or remarketing grid digital marketer, you'll find this article. It's quite a long one. You might want to print it out, but this is over on their site. Have a read of that. The main thing I wanted to say here is remarketing is now available on Gmail, and the team are reporting some really, really good results on those campaigns. Not a huge volume yet, but really, really good results. Google also announced at the summit last year these life events. Don't worry about that. There's very little volume there at this point. Eventually, they'll probably add some more. I suspect we'll see them start to copy Facebook a bit more in this area. So that'll probably ramp up, but for now, you can safely ignore those. There's some changes coming to similar audiences. This is a slide from the presentation I went to in Singapore at the Google offices there last year. Deepak is the engineer working on this. So this is going to get a little bit more like the Facebook with lookalike audiences. I suspect it still won't quite have the power that Facebook has with lookalikes, but similar is going to get better, which is long overdue and good news. But the more interesting thing for me is the intent side of things. Intent beats demographic information. Someone's behavior is far more predictive of whether they're likely to buy or not. In market, if you haven't used yet, you should be familiar with a whole list of approximately 500 categories that Google have classified people into. So people are in the market to buy golf equipment, for instance, based on their very recent abnormal activity. So maybe you like American football and you tend to go to all the American football sites over and over and over again. And all of a sudden you've started searching for golf stuff and visiting some golf sites, watching golf videos on YouTube. Google's going to put you in this bucket of somebody that's in the market for golf equipment right now. And that's based on sort of like a 1 to 2 week window. Now, one of the reasons you want to be aware of this is that in market will almost certainly this year will be another bidding layer that we can add over the top of our search and possibly even shopping campaigns eventually. But search will roll out first. So now you can bid for not only the fact that this person is searching for buy Miele washing machine, but they're also being categorized as being in the market for that. They're probably therefore more likely to buy, and you might want to put a bid mod on that, bid that a bit higher. But the bit that I'm really interested in, and this was my second talk at Trafficker Conversion this year where I dug into this in a bit more detail, is this thing called custom intent. And you can think of this as custom in market, really. If there isn't an in-market category that you can use, you can build your own. Now, Google lets you build your own manually, but it'll also auto-create these for you. So have a look inside your accounts when we get off this in a few minutes' time. Go see if Google has actually built some of those for you already, and then you can start advertising to that. So it's not the same, and I want to make it very, very clear, it's not the same as being able to put your remarketing code on your competitor's site, but it's pretty bloody close, right? You're able to give a list of keywords and URLs to Google and say, hey, people that are in the market for this sort of thing, I want to show ads to them, please. Even if they're not searching right now, even if they're not on my remarketing list because they haven't been to my site yet, but people that are in the market for this sort of thing, and you define your theme with some keywords and URLs, go find them, Google, and go put my ads in front of them, please. I think that this is the future of GDN. I think this is hugely, hugely powerful and a game changer. Hardly anybody is using it yet, so a huge competitive advantage to get in there first. So targeting, yeah, with some notable exceptions like smart display campaigns, which will improve, and potentially more and more automation coming to other parts of Google. Yes, we definitely want to be considering using the AI, machine learning, for this. So we move our little green marker further up towards 100%. Now messaging. In a nutshell, generally not very good at this point. At this point, having Google, now you may have seen some of the auto-suggested ads in your account, which, by the way, you can opt out of in settings in your account. You can say, Google, no, I don't want you to apply these, because they'll pop up in your account. They'll be there for 14 days to give you time to kill them. And if you don't, they'll automatically get applied after 14 days. You can opt out of that if you want to. Again, they're improving, but often the machine isn't wonderful at writing ad copy. Two AI tools, though, that you'd probably want to be aware of. Wordsmith for marketing. Now, I've heard that their pricing has changed a bit recently. We've used this in the past to automatically write reports based on Google Analytics data. They've also got a tool that you can feed it an Excel sheet or a Google Doc. You can have this thing with 100,000 rows of data in there, have the machine go dig into it, and it will surface the stories. It'll find the stories in that data. So it'll write this plain English report based on your analytics data. Now, I never use that as a client-facing report, but just as an idea starter, as a tool for the guys to help find those stories and then go do their own analysis and turn it into their own report or email to the client or conversation on the phone. Useful for that. And another one, Phrasey, which if you're doing a lot of email marketing, Virgin Holidays is the big case study that these guys use. Apparently 10 million quid that Virgin Holidays made by using this thing. It supposedly writes better email subject lines than you can. 98% certainty that it'll write something better than you can come up with. So if you're doing a lot of email, it might be worth a look. But generally, not quite there yet. So overall, I would say we end up round about here. But before we draw a line in the sand and say that's our conclusion, I just want to briefly touch on this topic of incentives. My co-author in the AdWords book is Perry Marshall, and he coined a phrase which many of you have probably heard over a decade ago of the AdWords stupidity tax. We have seen a lot of accounts over the years where a lot of money is being wasted. The typical account might be 10, 20%, but there are loads out there with 30, 40, 50% waste in there just because it's all broad batch. It's never been fixed. People have got no negs in there, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of waste. So if the AI is so much better, the question then becomes, well, who is it better for? And now Google would obviously say, well, for the users and therefore for the advertisers, and yes, for our shareholders as well. And yes, Google have done okay, and their revenue from advertising has grown pretty substantially over the years to $80 billion in 2016. For me, though, I don't really care about shareholders. I care about my clients. And for me, it has to be better for my clients. That's the thing that matters. And I care about profit. I don't care about impressions or click-through rate. I care about profit. And even with this fancy new interface, there is nowhere in that new interface that talks about profit. So you've got to ask there, whose profit are they optimizing for? Is it yours as the owner of that client, or is it ultimately theirs? I'm not going to go the conspiracy theory route here. I honestly believe that Google believe they are doing the best thing by users first and foremost, and that they want to do the best thing by advertisers. But I also think there'll be a number of cases where this gets used badly, and the stupidity, it won't automatically make stupidity tax go away. So we'll finish with a little to-do list for you so that you've got some practical takeaways from this to go do next week. Experiment more. I think that the biggest difference between the great and good agencies, probably now, arguably now, but certainly in a couple of years' time, will be the ones that experiment the most will be the winners. Start with bidding. Lots of ways you can use drafts and experiments, but start by testing whatever you're doing now against Google's automated bidding. Make sure you layer some audiences over the top of your search and shopping campaigns. Start with just remarketing or maybe customer match. Then start thinking about demographics and be ready if and when in market becomes an option in your account. Diversify. You wouldn't believe the number of people at Traffic and Conversion, 6,500 people, the number of people that were only on one platform. Most of them only on Facebook, many only on Amazon, and some only on Google. You don't want to be, as we've seen over the last few days with the Cambridge Analytica thing, you do not want to be completely dependent on one platform, because that's just too much risk for your business. Dan Kennedy always used to say the most dangerous number for any business is the number one customer, one platform, one key person, but one is a dangerous number. So make sure you go play with GDN. I still reckon probably less than 2% of advertisers use it, or certainly use it well. It can be a significant competitive advantage for you as an agency or for your business. And get great at writing persuasive copy. This is something that it'll take the machines a little longer to be able to do. Bidding, it's basically there. It's virtually impossible to beat, or will be very soon. But writing great copy is going to take the machine a bit longer, so add value there. And keep asking that question, where do I add value? Where do I add value for my clients? And as this becomes more and more automated, as it becomes more and more commoditized, where can I add value to them? And I would suggest that this is where we end up. There isn't a particular number, but it's in this region. It's a long way away from head in the sand, not using it at all. But I don't believe we should be using it unsupervised at 100% and completely trusting in the machine. I believe very strongly that the future is smart people working with smart machines. It will augment us. It will help improve our capabilities. And sure, it will replace a lot of tasks, but I don't believe it's going to replace all of us. Some small agencies may struggle, but it's not going to replace all digital agencies. Smart people working with smart machines is the future. And I will finish with this because I love Tim Urban's stuff. Wait, but why? This is probably what smart bidding, like if you were testing this stuff, this is probably what AdWords and smart bidding looked like at the beginning of last year. You do not want to be this guy. So get in there, play with it, and don't ignore it, because it is getting better very, very, very fast. There's my email address if you want us to look over an account for you that you're stuck with, or you want to ask about agency savvy. Please reach out to us on that email. And that's me done, almost on the hour mark. An hour and a minute, not bad. How you going, Carl? How are we doing? Any questions we need to?
Yeah, we do. That was certainly fascinating. I have a few questions myself. If anyone else has questions, go ahead and type them in. We have a little extra time here. So, Mike, first I wanted to start, you talked about the display network a lot and how much you love it. Obviously, a lot of success on that would have to do with what you are selling, what you are offering, and how you are putting your message in front of that potentially very cold display traffic. Do you have any insights on like what types of offers, what types of products are working best with display ads right now?
Oh gosh, it's such an individual thing. I think that the best advice, the best way I can answer that question is probably not exactly the answer you're looking for, but is to say, test the offer. Most people assume that their offer is the one, and then they go and test a whole bunch of different targeting, or they might test a whole bunch of different ads inside of AdWords, but they never think to test the offer. You know, they're still trying to push that free ebook that worked really well when Ed Dale and Frank Kern were doing it 12 years ago. Doesn't really work as well now. You know, should that be a video series or video course, or is it the white paper? What are they opting in for? And yeah, I think we all know that the free line has moved significantly. Evan Pagan had a lot to do with that. But how much value are you giving before you're demanding an opt-in? Quizzes I see working very well. So, you know, Levesque has really popularized that with his Ask method. Mate of mine, Nick, up in Sydney, has a wonderful piece of kit called Leads Hook. It's leadshook.com, which is quizzes on steroids, really is the easy way to explain that. Decision trees, and you can put sort of people through this, what looks a bit like a quiz, but it's far more sophisticated, and you can collect bits of data from them as you go through. So you don't go through a quiz and then ask for an opt-in, or have an opt-in at the front and then put them through a quiz. You might give them some value, ask a couple of pretty innocuous questions, deliver some more value based on the answers that they gave, and then say, hey, we'd love to send you this piece of value. What's your email address? Mm-hmm. Deliver some more, ask another couple of questions, ask for another little bit of information. And so bit by bit, as you're delivering value, you know, you're asking first date questions and then going on some dates and asking some second date questions and going on some dates, but continually giving that value before you get it. I think that's the smart way to be delivering value in this day and age, not just knocking people over the head and saying, oi, we want your information, give it to us or you can't have anything. I think that's utterly the wrong way to go about it. So that's how I'd be thinking about it. But the most important thing would be to test different offers.
Okay, great. Now, Billy has a question. I was kind of wondering the same thing. And he shared his experience of using smart bidding, and his cost per click went 2 to 3 times what it used to be. Mm-hmm. So really, once everybody is using smart bidding and it becomes Google's AI bidding against itself, what is going to happen? What does that mean for, you know, for bidding and
right,
what we're going to be spending?
Yeah. Good question. I'll come back to the profit thing. So Google is going to get very, very good at hitting the target CPA that you want it to hit. So let's say I set mine at $50, you set yours at 30, because we've got different offers, we've got different landers, we've got different conversion rates, we've got different back ends to our business, and we've got obviously different metrics that the business runs on. Google will get very good at meeting those CPAs. It's not in Google's best interests to go much under that, because obviously that's going to, if it thinks it could get the leads for 10, it's not going to magically start popping the leads up for 10 every day. If you've said go get them for 50, I suspect it'll be more likely to get them for 50. again, in my humble opinion, I'm not a lawyer. Don't sue me, Google. What it is never going to tell you, though, is what that target should be to maximize profit, or certainly what it's not going to do yet. I would love to see them do this. There are a couple of good blog posts out there about this. I think Merkel did one 2012, if you can find it, on optimizing for profit. The maths get a bit curly. It's very, very hard to do, optimizing for profit. Google are not doing that. They could. The machine learning is powerful enough. They could say, and maybe one day they'll get there. Maybe one day they'll say, give us a feed out of 0, tell us all your business numbers, and give us your credit card, and leave everything in the middle to us, please. Maybe we'll get there in 5-10 years' time. Who knows? I suspect that's probably what Sergey and Larry would love, but we're not there yet. And so it'll optimize mine for 50 and yours for 30, but it won't tell me, hey, you should be actually putting in 30, or you should be actually putting in 15 as the target, and I'll go get you them for 15. And so that's the huge difference that will still be there between those accounts. And it not just because we should all be going and getting them for 20, but because we all have different conversion rates, different backends, different ways of monetizing and profiting from those leads or from those sales. So that I think there's enough diversity, I guess, between all of the different businesses, even in the same market, that are bidding on the same keywords, that the metrics are always going to be vastly different. And so Billy's point about the machine sort of optimizing for all those, I don't think, certainly at this stage, that's going to be a problem.
Okay. We have a question from Drazen, and he's wondering, and this is kind of timely, I don't know if it was intended to be this timely, but wondering, what is your opinion on how Google is going to handle Google partner agencies, and are they going to continue to exist? Of course, I say that's timely because they just removed some features for Google partners. So how does that tie into AI?
What they have just launched here in Australia, and it's what they've just improved on. Last year, they launched a program called Google Honors, which apparently many other markets are looking at fairly keenly. Went to the relaunch of it the other night. What they're essentially doing is gamifying us. By dangling some nice carrots in the shape of Google Home Minis and maybe the odd trip to Mountain View, by offering up these prizes, they can then gamify us to go do the stuff that they want us to do, like make sure automated bidding is on every campaign in your account, like making sure that you're layering audiences over the top of your search and shopping campaigns, or having at least 3 expanded text ads in every ad group. Anyone with a rep will have been hearing that one for about the past year every time they call. So they want us to do all of this stuff. Now, again, you could take the high road here and say that the reason they do that is that because they honestly believe that that is going to get us the best results, and that's why they want us to do it. Or you could take the conspiracy theory route of that's going to get them the data that they need to feed the machine so the machine gets better and better. I'll leave it entirely up to you which of those paths you go down, or somewhere in the middle. But they are certainly wanting us to play the game, and they're incentivizing everybody to play the game that they want us to play. They do, the party line is, they keep saying that agencies are a core part of their future, and they want agencies to still be around, and they want to help us, and they don't want us to replace us, and they don't want it to go away. But you got to look at, some of the recent actions, and you sort of scratch your chin a bit and say, really? We'll see how that plays out.
Okay. And I know you got to get going. Do you have time for one more question, Mike?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, and by the way, I see some questions in here not really related to AI. If you guys can, just go ahead and post those in the AdWords Marketing Strategy Facebook group, and you can get some help on that kind of stuff in there. But the last question I want to end with, Mike, Hank is asking about the recommended number of conversions to really let the smart bidding go. Does it really need to be 50 a month, or if you have 100 or more over several months, is that good enough to at least test it, or do you really recommend on hitting that minimum threshold of 50 a month?
If you can, then so as an example, let me come at it this another way. With GDN, what we'll tend to do is manufacture a different conversion action so that we've got more data, because managing conversions and optimizing for conversions are two very different things. So we might use micro conversions, particularly with GDN, where we expect conversion rates to be lower. If your conversion rate is too low, it's going to take way too long to get the data to be able to optimize for that. So we might use something like a time on site or a page depth, or they click the add to cart button or something like that to end up with a conversion rate. I typically like to find something in the range of sort of 5 to 15%. A conversion rate of 50% is useless because everybody's doing it, and a conversion rate of 0.1% is useless because nobody's doing it. 5 to 15% gives me a nice balance between useful data that's hopefully fairly correlated with the end thing that I want, somebody spending money with my client, but it's giving me enough data that I can optimize quickly. So I tend to look at it that way of how do I give the machine the data it needs to be able to speed up what it's doing. So that might mean that you add more things into your conversion column. Maybe you've got some micro conversions, but they're all hiding in the all conversion column right now. So you might move one or two of those across to the conversion column, because Google's only going to use what's in the conversion column for the automated bidding. So if you've got a few hundred over the last few months and you're not quite at those, and those were just sort of rule of thumb guidelines that I gave, they're not hard and fast numbers, I would lean more at this point in time. If you'd asked me a year ago, it would have been a very different answer. But at this point in time, I would lean more to doing the test anyway. You're almost certainly going to have to do a 50-50 test. You won't have enough data to do a 90-10 or an 80-20 test. You're pretty much going to have to split that campaign traffic in half and push half to the experiment, because now maybe the experiment's only getting 10-15 a month and the main campaign's only getting 10-15 a month. It's going to be pretty difficult with anything less than that for the machine to do anything. But again, you're optimizing that campaign manually at the moment, making some decisions. Google would say that the machine is going to be equally as good at that. However, they're also going to be a bit stupid, and they're going to spend money, like we saw before with the maximize clicks example. They're not afraid to go and get an extra 10 clicks to decide whether those combinations of signals were important or not. Those 10 clicks might have just cost your client $100. That might be a lot of money for that particular client. And that's why it needs a lot more supervision with those smaller numbers, because it is more likely to go off the rails. Again, give it enough time, it'll probably sort itself out. But to your point before, we've all had that situation where we've tested one of these things and it has performed horribly. The core message I want to leave with is that just because it did that those couple of times doesn't mean you should ignore it and stop testing, because it has near perfect information. It knows every single keyword in every single account and every AdWords account on the planet and all of the history of all of those. And it's watching that every second of the day and learning from that. It also has near perfect information on the other side of the fence, all of us people doing the searching, doing the buying. It knows the type of websites that we tend to go to. It knows whether or not we tend to be buyers. It knows that on 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm on the train to work and less likely to buy. Not that it knows that I'm, exactly doing that, but it infers that pattern from all of that data, that at that time of day, when these signals are present, conversion rate tends to be lower, therefore less likely to show a click or show an ad to that person. They're less likely to click. There's so many signals, 70 million data points in 0.1 seconds, that we just can't compete with that. And so it will get better and better and better with these lower volume accounts. So test sooner rather than later.
Okay, awesome. So we will end with that. And guys, if everyone who's still on, if you can just type into the chat what you thought about this, just real quick. I'm sure Mike would appreciate that type of feedback. Check out Mike's website, websavvy.com.au. He has a great program for agency owners that I can vouch for, and I highly recommend just learning everything you can from him. I'm sure he's going to continue to put out great content and stay ahead of the curve much more than most other people in this game. So with that, I'll go ahead and end this. Yes, there will be a replay of this that I'll send out so you can watch this. You can get the slides. So you'll be able to go through this content a little more slowly if you need to. So Mike, thanks again. This was awesome.
Thanks, Carl.
And have a great day.
Cheers, mate. You too. See ya.